Treasuries have proven always to be a reliable safe haven investment.
Recession fears have caused investors to flee to safe investments like Treasury bonds.
U.S. Treasury bonds are pretty safe.
Emerging countries from around the world have been very focused on de-dollarization and trying to get out of the large shadow that is the United States. But if that's true, how can it also be true that they continue to buy up US debt and invest in the American economy? Before we can answer that, we have to take a step back and understand how the global financial system even works. The reason why it's so difficult to shake off the dollar is because of its world reserve currency status, which basically means that it's the most preferred, most used, and most stable currency around the world. But this hasn't always been the case. Since 1450, there have actually been 6 major world reserve currency periods. More recently, France held this title from 1720 to 1815, followed by Great Britain ending in 1920, and the US dollar became the world reserve currency shortly after that and still obviously holds that title today. So for the last 100+ years, the US dollar has been at the center of the world. On average, each currency held its title for 94 years, meaning the US dollar is technically past the point of expiration. When a currency becomes the world's reserve, there are 3 main characteristics it possesses. The first is stability. Stability makes it much easier for international trade, just like when you communicate with someone, you need a common language. In this case, a common currency is needed that everyone can agree on and know the value of the currency is reliable. So when things get tough financially around the world, investors run back to the dollar knowing that they can rely on it due to its world reserve currency status. But with the rise of BRICS and other emerging countries, we are starting to see the dollar being left out of trade deals all around the world. We are seeing BRICS countries push for the use of local currencies, specifically the Chinese yuan and the Indian rupee for their transactions. The Asian nations signed an agreement to be more intentional on using local currencies. Latin America have even spoken about creating a regional currency to reduce the need of the dollar. And even the European Union have expressed interest in using less dollars. There are so many more of these examples, but you get the point. As stable as the dollar is, countries are trying to be more strategic about their currency usage, even if that means using a less stable option in the short term. The second power of the world reserve currency is its exclusivity to buy oil. After World War II, the US created something known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, where gold was the basis for the US dollar and essentially tied all currencies around the world to the dollar. The dollar remained a powerhouse until the early 1970s when the United States ran out of money and was no longer able to continue their arrangement of dollars for gold. So when the gold deal ran out, why didn't countries just go back to using their own currencies? Because the dollar was tied so closely to oil purchases. The US made a deal with Saudi Arabia, making the dollar the only allowable currency to buy oil in. And this was the birth of what we know today as the petrodollar. So in order for countries to continue powering their country with oil, they needed to hold the dollar to do so, making the dollar a necessity for countries around the world. But again, we are starting to see a shift away from that. At the 2023 BRICS Summit, led by the countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they invited 6 new countries to the bloc effective January 1st, 2024. The invitations to Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have many strategic advantages to joining the bloc, which I've covered in detail on this channel. But for this topic, let's focus on the additions of Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, as they are some of the largest oil producers in the world. And now altogether, BRICS will have 6 of the top 10 oil producers in the world. So as these strategic partnerships advance, it would make the most sense that the dollar will be used less and less in these oil transactions going forward. The third advantage for the country that holds the world reserve currency is it becomes an investing juggernaut, which is the main topic of this video today. But before we get into that, I make videos about world news impacting the dollar and the United States. So if this is a topic that you enjoy, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can get more of them. Countries around the world have to hold the world reserve currency for international trade, and right now, this is called the dollar wallet. As I alluded to earlier, countries use the money in their dollar wallet as an intermediary currency and to purchase oil. But countries don't use all the money in their dollar wallet, so instead of just having it sit there, losing purchasing power over time to inflation, the next best thing is to use a large portion of that money to invest in US markets. Historically seen as one of the safest investments, the United States issues debt, otherwise known as bonds or treasuries, in which countries, corporations, and individual investors can give a lump sum investment in which they will receive back at the end of the loan with interest on top. These investments are how the United States fund many things in their government, and it's a never-ending cycle. Over the last 10, 20 years, countries around the world have been trying to get less exposure to the United States, as being tied to US markets no longer matches their economic strategy, like China, for example. And the proof of that is in this chart here. The section in orange represents US debt holdings by other countries, and the section in gray represents all other holdings, like from corporations or individual investors. And as you can see, foreign investors' share increased significantly throughout the years, especially in the early 2000s, and peaked at almost 50% of the holdings in 2010. But since then has been going back down to around 30% of all holdings. And if we dig a little deeper and look specifically at just the foreign holdings breakout, Japan and China make up a large portion of these foreign holdings even to this day. And China dramatically increased their holdings volume from 2004 to 2010 before turning around and being a part of one of the biggest sell-offs in history over the past decade plus. While countries have tried to disengage themselves from the US debt machine, it's just so challenging because whenever there's chaos or fear in the markets, everyone just runs towards the safe haven of the US bond market. And the larger the market becomes, the harder it is for the world to deleverage away from it. On top of that, there is nowhere else for investors to go. The US bond market is just as large as the other G7 nations plus China combined. This just shows that the United States has so much economic power, and the world goes as they go. Whether the United States economy is doing great or doing poorly, it's a complete domino effect to the rest of the world. If you like this video, I found a link of how the dollar in the United States recently caused a global recession, which you can watch in this video here.